My name's John. I'm from Valve. We've been working for a couple of years now on a Debian derivative called SteamOS, or SteamOS, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I've been at Valve for a couple of years, and one thing I've found when I tell people I work there is there's two reactions. Some people have no idea what Valve is or what they do, and some people are incredibly passionately excited about Valve. If you're in the first category, Valve has been around since 1996. It was originally started to develop PC games, mainly focused on Windows PCs. We have a wide list of PC games, some mainly on Windows, also Mac and Linux now, but originally started on Windows, and a few of them are on consoles as well. Some you've heard of, some maybe you haven't. But anyway, that's how Valve got its start. But along the way, we developed this platform called Steam. Started off just as a way to update our games, turned into an application store for PC games, social network, messaging. Now it's a huge community. Over 75 million active users logging into Steam, playing games, communicating with their friends. Thousands of games supported on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So one thing that a few years ago Valve saw was open platforms are really important. The way we work at Valve is we put stuff out there, listen to our customers, iterate on things quickly, listen to our feedback, and try to give our customers what they want, right? The things they like, we'll do more of that. Things they don't like, well, we'll stop doing that. And open platforms, the ability for people to run whatever they want on their computers, modify games, create their own content, really breeds that innovation, that kind of people do stuff you'd never expect when you give them, the keys to their own car. And they can sometimes crash to the wall, and sometimes they do amazing, great things. And one thing that's been a trend lately over the last years we've noticed is a lot of platforms now are not becoming less open. You have consoles where you have to go through, what the console manufacturer to get your software on that box. You have the iOS and Android app stores, and even on the traditional PC platforms like Windows and OS X, you're seeing these gated communities of app stores. So Valve, we wanted to understand what's that. How do we think about that? How do we counter that effect and build our own platform? At the same time, we're thinking about how we can get into the living room, take the games people enjoy on their desktops, bring them to the couch, the 10-foot environment, so they can enjoy those on their big screen TVs, just like a console today. And this required a lot of work across a lot of different parts of Steam and the games. First is the big picture, sort of living room experience. The same interface you want on your desktop, we call a 2-foot experience with a mouse and a keyboard, isn't appropriate when you're sitting on your couch watching your 65-inch TV on the wall. So we have a whole new UI for Steam, designed to be operated with a controller from a 10-foot, very big pictures, very big motions. Steam in-home streaming is a way that we can take your Windows games that don't run on Linux, run them remotely. We actually stream the UI, stream the input over the network, whether wireless or a wired network to a Linux PC. And you can play that Windows-only game on your Linux box and actually get a great experience out of it. It's, a lot of people don't think this is going to work, but they try it, and it's almost magical in a way how well it works. I personally was pretty surprised at how good the experience is. We've gotten the latency down really low. It's a very high-quality gaming experience. Family sharing for letting people with multiple Steam accounts share the same Steam account. If I buy a game on my account, other people in my family can play it on the same box. And then the Steam controller is an effort that's been going on for a long time. It's really one of the pillars of our Steam machine. And that's a way to make it possible to play these keyboard-centric PC games with a controller. A traditional controller isn't going to work very well with these games. They're designed to be played with a mouse and keyboard. So we've done some innovative stuff around touchpads and adaptive binding of controller buttons to keyboard to make it a really good experience there. And that's something that's ongoing. And then, of course, we wanted to bring all this stuff to Linux so we could have an open platform where people could do whatever they wanted with the box. We could sort of develop our own community of people experimenting and taking this platform in ways we didn't expect. So that started out with Steam for Linux, porting games to Linux, both Valve games and other companies' games. And then finally SteamOS, which is the Debian distribution that we've developed at Valve. And then finally pulling it all together onto the Steam machines, which will be shipping as a bundled piece of hardware. So Steam for Linux goal was to take all the stuff we got on Steam, deliver that same great gaming experience onto Linux desktops. Originally focused on Ubuntu 12.04 LTS at the time. That was by far the predominant desktop Linux distribution. But we had, as you may have heard from Linus last night, a real problem with binary compatibility. How do we take, one product, Steam, and all the games that run on Steam and make those run across a whole set of distributions? It's really hard. There's not a good way to do it. There's no way you're going to rebuild all these games for every different distribution. What we ended up doing was creating what we call the Steam runtime. That's a very similar to Ubuntu 12.04 binary system. We lay that down and we run all the games on top of that user space. And so far that's been pretty successful. We've targeted all our partners to run their games on top of the Steam runtime. Steam itself runs on top of that. And we maintain that set of binaries across the set of distributions, and going forward we'll guarantee binary compatibility for those games. And this was released about 6 months ago. And I'm happy to say there's over 600 Linux games now on Steam that you can download and run on your Linux box, which is pretty amazing when you consider where we started from. Okay, now we have Steam for Linux that's out there. We've got a third party porting their games to Steam. We've got a good installed base. We've got streaming, so we can bring your Windows games to Steam. The next step was really build out our own living room platform called SteamOS. Make it consumer friendly, something that anybody could buy, whether at your local hardware store or order on the internet. Give you great Steam performance. It's really tuned, latest and greatest graphics drivers, high-end systems that can compete with a console, an Xbox One or PS4. Provide a great streaming client. If you have existing Windows games you want to play on your big screen, this is a great way to do that. Connect this box to your TV, and you're done. Off you go. The main distribution channel for this is going to be through our partners, through our OEMs, people selling Steam machines, pre-installed, a full bundle with SteamOS, the Steam controller, and the Steam machine. But it is an open platform. It's not a lockdown box. If you want to, get to the desktop and install whatever you want on it, you want to develop your own software for it, it's wide open. It's really Debian underneath, something everybody in this room is familiar with, I'm sure, and people can do and have done pretty interesting things with that platform. Things that it's not, I always think it's important to understand what it is you're not doing, or else you end up doing everything. It's not a great desktop. It's a terrible Linux desktop. People want to use it as a Linux desktop. It's never designed to be that. We have a desktop system, but it's really a placeholder. It's a bare bones thing. I don't encourage people to install this and use it as their daily workstation. There's plenty of Linux desktops out there already that do that. Valve is not really going to play in that space. Some people want to dual boot it with Windows. Again, and that's something that maybe is an interesting exercise, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a product perspective. If you already have Windows and Steam on your desktop PC, that's great. Why would you also want SteamOS on there? To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We haven't invested a lot of time in that. Some people do it, but mainly just to prove it can be done. And because it's an OEM product designed to be sold through the hardware channel, it's not really designed to be installed by end users. They're not going to be faced with a Debian installer kind of experience to put this on their box. It'll come out of the box with a full 10-foot experience, and they'll never see the install process underneath. VM client, people like to try to run SteamOS in a VM because we really depend on the 3D accelerated graphics very heavily in OpenGL. It's never going to be a good experience running this in a VM client today. The 3D graphics is just not there yet. Someday perhaps, but not yet. And older hardware is also another thing that is not really a target for us. People I have this old laptop lying around, I want to put SteamOS on it. It's not going to be a great experience. We really haven't spent much time on that, and we really don't plan to. These are going to be pretty new hardware, new boxes, new drivers. Some of the changes we made within Steam mainly focused around consumerization. We have automatic updates using the standard apt and unattended upgrades package set up to update it at shutdown time. So the user never has to say, oh geez, there's updates, I got to do this, I got to do updates or whatever. Just within Steam they see a notification, they need to reboot their computer to apply updates, applies them automatically, and it's done. It's not a opt-in thing like it is in some operating systems. It's out of the box, it's going to stay up to date, it's going to be updated regularly, we'll stay on top of security patches and such like that. Improve the graphical boot. The whole experience from the firmware up through the initial load of Steam has been tuned. We've worked with our firmware partners to make sure that they get a good, consistent experience. They don't see text flying by or random mode switches or things flying in and out of the screen. They just see Steam coming up and are boot right into Steam logon screen. And it's all controller friendly. The initial boot, you go through the whole thing, selecting your time zone, your language, whatever, that's all controller driven. You don't ever need a keyboard or mouse attached to this box to get the thing installed, to get it up and running, get logged in. The other thing we've done that's a little interesting is some work in X to enable a separate Steam session, which is just Steam running in big picture, and a desktop session with a traditional GNOME desktop. And you can turn on that desktop experience and switch back and forth between them on the fly. So the graphics stack obviously is something we care a lot about for performance reasons, for hardware reasons. We do expect to be using the latest and greatest hardware from our partners. We need to have the latest and greatest drivers to take advantage of that. So we work very closely with them, as well as the seamless boot and shutdown sequences I've mentioned. That requires the firmware to do the right thing, requires the grub bootloader to do the right thing, requires the graphics driver to do the right thing. So there's changes throughout the whole stack to make that all work seamlessly. We spent some time working on Mesa to get better Intel integrated graphics support. That's a really important price point for us because that's kind of the lowest price point. And it's a very price sensitive area, so we want to do the best we can to get the best graphics performance out of that part we can. And we're working again with AMD and NVIDIA to make sure that we have the latest of their drivers, work closely with them on graphics performance in the various games, make sure if there's any issues we can address it and we can roll out newer drivers. This is what you see when you boot up a SteamOS machine, assuming it's been correctly configured by the OEM. You get the native TV timings. The firmware is responsible for figuring out what the right settings are, setting that up, and handing that off to EFI. And then that flows all the way through, that mode flows all the way through to Steam and the initial Steam experience. So if you're used to the kind of janky in and out, mode switching, black screens in between, we've done a lot of work to pay that out and make sure it looks just like one simple system booting up. The full screen graphics environment, this is another interesting work we've done with our own composition manager. There's really only one application running in SteamOS generally when you're running in the Steam environment, and that's either Steam or the game. So you always get full screen. If the game tries to put up a small window, it'll be scaled so it looks full screen. We do our own custom compositing here. Redirect the mouse input to the right window and make sure that if you have an app that hangs, there's a Steam overlay. We can always bring that overlay up because it's running out of process and it's integrated with a composition manager. You can bring the overlay up, kill that app, and return back into Steam. That's something we couldn't do in just a standard Linux or even Windows environment where you have to be in the application process to put up that overlay. The Mesa driver, this is something where we've done a lot of work working with a company called LunarG. They have a lot of OpenGL graphics expertise to really update the Mesa that is in Debian Wheezy to something that can run our games and run the other games and be really performant on the latest Intel hardware. So we've cherry-picked patches and funded them to actually implement some new performance-focused features in Mesa. This is all open source on our GitHub. You can go up there, you can see the branch that we're using in SteamOS today, submit patches, whatever you want. And this is something we think is going to be really important for the Intel-based graphics to get that competitive. Our Linux kernel, again, because we want to be able to run with the newest hardware, we've updated our Linux kernel. It's based on the 3.10 long-term branch. We have various hardware drivers as our partners come and say, hey, we're shipping this platform with this wireless part that's not supported. We'll work with them and with a wireless card vendor to integrate that driver into our kernel and ship it. We've improved, obviously, the Xbox 360 controller support, so it's seamless out-of-the-box support. Just plug in your Xbox 360 controller, and we detect it and go with it. And hopefully this is something we can collaborate with our hardware partners over time to get patches in our kernel to support their hardware.
Are all those improvements, like especially the controller support, are those going upstream to kernel and Xorg?
The controller support specifically, I believe we've sent upstream. Purely would know because he did it.
Yeah, the patches have been sent upstream. There's been some discussion, as always, when you send something upstream. So eventually it will make its way there in some shape or form, hopefully.
And a lot of the hardware support packages we've actually pulled from upstream, backported into our kernel to get the newer hardware support in our older kernel. So now I'll talk a little bit about the build and release process. SteamOS, I think, just from going to some of the discussions here, is a little bit different than some of the other Debian derivatives we've talked to. Now we've actually rebuilt all the Debian packages from source. We use a system called OBS, Open Build System. Open Build System, is that right? Collabora helped us set this up, and it's worked out really well for us to pull in changes, pull in new packages, build them, and deploy them. We also have another system called Merge-O-Matic that looks at the upstreams. If there's a security patch upstream or some newer release upstream from us, it'll automatically merge in that patch, submit a request to OBS. We can just approve it. Boom, it goes in, gets rebuilt in our system, pushes out to our repository where we can then do our own testing if we need to of that. And the way that we do our release process, we modeled our SteamOS release process off the Steam client release process. If you're not familiar with that, the way it works is there's a beta channel that updates pretty regularly. We try to be on like a 1-week update cadence for the last 6 months or so on SteamOS. We'll push out changes pretty regularly. They're maybe not very well tested. People who can opt into that beta channel, test it, give us feedback. After we feel like we've got what's in that beta channel is stable, getting good feedback from our customers, they'll get promoted to the release channel, which is where everybody will then get that update. So we have, early adopters, people want to be on the bleeding edge, can opt into this, and we might break you, we might break your video driver. I think we just broke some people's sound drivers last week. We'll try to address all those issues before we promote that to Alchemist. And then recently we've moved to the same model with a Steam runtime, which is a binary compatibility layer that the games will target, and we'll be updating that in the same way where we'll have a beta, and once we feel like we have good coverage on the games and maybe do a formal test pass, that'll get promoted to release. That's something that updates much less frequently. We try not to touch that Steam runtime unless we have to. But SteamOS, we have been rolling out pretty frequent regular updates right now. I think once we ship and have real hardware, that cadence will slow a bit until it's just probably critical security patches, maybe new drivers every 6 months or so. Not really sure what the cadence of that is going to be, and we're just sort of play that by ear a little. But that process has worked pretty well for us. So this is in general what our build workflow looks like. We have, most of our packages come out of Wheezy. A few we've taken from Jesse, the newer versions we needed for one reason or other. And Merge-O-Matic, it basically monitors those every day on a daily basis, detects any changes that are different from what we have, automatically tries to merge them and pull them in and submit them into our OBS. We have a few packages on GitHub, like the kernel, the Mesa library I discussed, which today is a pretty manual process to bring that GitHub source into OBS and build it. And similarly, we have a few internal packages that are maintained in an internal Perforce system that Valve uses, and those also flow into OBS in the same way. When OBS builds them, they go into what we call the SteamOS master repository, which is always the latest and greatest things that have been built on the build system. And the next step is to take those and propagate those out to somewhere where we can test them in a way that our customers will test them. So the first step is we use rep repro heavily to move stuff around between the various repos. We have an internal repository of Alchemist Beta. The first step is to prop out the stuff to there, and then we can do some internal testing within Valve, just using that repository, update our systems, point them at that repo, make sure everything works. Once we feel like, okay, we've done the testing we need to, the targeted testing based on the changes we need to know, we know we've made, or based on just general smoke tests, we push that out. We can pull that out to our internal global repository, which is the main release repository. And from there, we use rsync to basically replicate our internal repository out onto the internet, and that's when everybody can get the same bits that we're testing internally. And the rsync from internal to external happens both when we prop an external beta and when we prop an external release. It's always just basically a mirror copy from our internal repository to the external one. So what's next? We're kind of in a state, we've got a lot of hardware in flight right now and trying to make sure all those parts line up before we can ship Steam machines out to the real world, respond to some feedback, enable the hardware that our partners need enabled. And then looking past our V1, which is going to ship on the first hardware that comes out, what do we do next? I'm really interested in moving away from an app-based update to more of an image-based update system. We see this like with the Chromebooks. We see this, I think, some other Ubuntu seems to be moving towards this. Read-only image that's applied across everybody's machines is always the same, and be able to roll that image forward in a more consistent way. That gives you a real control over what's on the bits that are on everybody's machine. You can roll the things back, move to a different image very easily in a way you can't do with app today. You can do it atomically as well if you're clever. But it sort of takes away some of the control that people have over their machine, being able to install arbitrary things, being able to install their own packages. So figuring out what's the right trade-off there between having a consistent consumer class appliance and being able to service that and being able to have a platform that people can do arbitrary things with and still get a great experience. That's something I don't think anybody has solved quite yet. We're looking at a couple things for the next release in that area. Improving the desktop experience, what we have there is basically a bare bones GNOME desktop. It's not by any means a great experience. It's a good way to open a terminal window and install some other stuff. It'd be interesting, I think, to figure out what does a 10-foot TV-centric desktop look like. I don't think there's anything really out there today that gives a kind of a power user experience, ability to control your system at a fine level. But we don't have one today. I don't know if we'll build one or if the community will build one or whatever, but I think it's a pretty interesting area. A long-term binary compatibility with the Steam runtime, that's been working pretty well for us so far. It's a little limited. Not sure exactly how we'll move that kind of binary level forward to take advantage of new libraries and things. Whether we'll just add stuff into the existing one or whether we'll have multiple runtimes and apps can opt into that. Looking at some of the work that's going on in containerization and being able to isolate things from each other, I think there's a really interesting area there for us to provide a consistent binary compatibility environment that we can maintain across multiple distributions as a target for people who want to deliver a binary application through Steam. The other thing is how do we make it easy for people to install stuff that's not through Steam on a Steam machine, right? There's people who don't want to deliver their application through Steam. They want to do it through their own website, their own channel. There's things that we might not want on Steam for some reason. How do we make it so people can install that easily? I know there's a bunch of efforts going on, starting up now about sandboxed, compatible application, unprivileged things. And I think we're trying to stay on top of that for us and figure out where can we leverage the community and coming up with a standard for click to install sandboxed applications that would work just as well on a Steam machine as they would on a desktop or a phone environment. And then moving to Jessie is something that's on our radar. Alchemist is based on Wheezy. It'll stay based on Wheezy forever. At some point we'll have a new release that'll be based on Jessie. There's going to be a bunch of work there. There's a lot of changes we need to think about and what's the right thing to do for us and when that will happen. We're still up in the air a bit. And thanks. I just want to say, I take this opportunity to say thanks to the Debian developers and the Debian community. We could not have done this without all the work people all over the world and in this room have done. I don't know if people are aware of this, but we have a standing offer. Anybody who's a Debian developer can get a free Valve key on Steam that will unlock all the Valve games for you for free on Steam. Just email debian-steam@collabora.com. Mail signed by your key in your keyring, and it can't be a 1024-bit key, right? So far, I think we've given out 415 keys. So if there's been a decline in productivity of Debian developers, might be some correlation there, I don't know. But that's it. So if you have other questions, there's some links, more information. We have a sort of a general overview of all our Steam living room efforts at steampower.com. There's a whole community with forums, questions, and answers that we monitor on a regular basis on Steam Community. We also post any update announcements there on the SteamOS group whenever we put out a new beta or a new release that goes up there. You can look on the Valve software GitHub. There's, as well as the stuff I've mentioned, there's some other open source projects from Valve. And of course, if you're interested in working on any of this stuff, Valve hiring, there's some job postings there, or feel free to email me directly. Great.
I think one of the reasons that PC gaming was so successful from the very beginning is that you could use the same PC for work and for games. The work you're doing on making SteamOS computer easier to boot and easier to manage from with 10-foot UI. I think it would be useful if you could combine that with a proper working desktop. So I think a lot of people would prefer to have their living room PC also be a PC.
Okay. I'm not going to disagree with you. I personally don't, but I believe some people do, and I know people have tried to, install LibreOffice on their SteamOS machine to do spreadsheets from their couch, I guess. And again, that's something that right now we don't think it's really a thing. Maybe the community will do some stuff in that area, and when we'll pick it up and adopt it. I'm not saying we'll never do it. It's not super high on our priority list to make this a productivity experience as well as a gaming experience.
Keep talking.
Keep talking.
Yeah. So I'm myself not interested in games, but I'm interested in the fact that others like games, and by that fact would probably come to Debian because you provide games on SteamOS. So what would be what I would love to see would be people using Debian because they want to play games on SteamOS. So my question would be, what would it take for Valve to bring Steam directly into Debian in a way or another, so that it would be one of the possibilities to play Steam games?
Well, just to clarify, all these games all work today on Debian. In fact,
but like
Steam is.
You have some other. You do some modification on SteamOS, like you optimize X and kernel and whatever. Did you think about bringing that directly to Debian?
A lot of the optimizations we've made are kind of specific to the environment we have and not necessarily applicable to Debian at large. Things that we think make sense to go upstream, we'll definitely try to push upstream. I don't think, maybe Pierre-Luc can talk to this one better, but I don't think the patch we've made to the X server, for instance, are broadly enough applicable that they would make a whole lot of sense in a general purpose operating system.
Yeah, right now there's a lot of stuff that's kind of hackish put together to achieve that. So, for example, the X server we have would not work properly in a traditional desktop environment. However, we're trying to standardize all that and getting it into a position where you can use all our components in SteamOS mode or in regular mode. It's worth it to note that some people have already done that in some capacity. For example, there's an Ubuntu PPA that lets you install our kernel modules, our improved Xbox controller, and the full SteamOS session side by side with your desktop productivity session using our SteamComp manager, which is fully open source. They repackaged it, so you can get that full experience traditionally next to a traditional Linux desktop today. It's just a little bit rough around the edges right now, and we're hopefully going to make it better in the future. There were any other questions, right? Yes.
I mean, we'd love to be as close to upstream as we can, but we're not afraid to make changes when we need to. And if there's things that we change that make sense upstream, we're happy to work with the right people to make it happen.
I have a question regarding libraries that developers can use. Do you have a list of compatible libraries with the Steam runtime? So as soon as we produce a game, it can also be made readily available on SteamOS and other Linux platforms that use Steam.
Well, you're saying, what are the libraries in the Steam runtime? Is that the question?
Yes. What libraries does it link to, for example?
Yeah, you can go up to the GitHub, and the Steam runtime is one of the things that's up there. What's in there is the traditional X, OpenGL, audio stuff that you would expect. I mean, it's basically the things that are in the runtime are the things that games are using today, and that's why they're in the runtime. There are some scripts up there as well that let you monitor your application and see if there's anything it's using that's not in the runtime. So you could either correct that or work with us to add stuff into the runtime. It's not out of the question that we add stuff in. It's pretty hard for us to take stuff back out because that's the potential to break things. Does that answer your question?
Just a quick comment in response to the point about using Steam on Debian. It's already in the non-free repository of Jesse and Sid, so while not on Wheezy, in subsequent versions of Debian, you can already do Linux gaming, admittedly not with the various alterations to the lower layers, but if they're not suitable for general use, I see why they're not there. So you can already do them side by side. I've done it. It works.
Yeah, and Pierre and I had lunch with Michael Gilbert today as a packager for that, so we're trying to make it better for Steam in Debian.
So two quick questions. One, how are you looking at Wayland yet?
We've looked at Wayland. Right now, it's not there for us. Mm-hmm. When we look at Wayland and they promise compatibility with X, and we now have hundreds and hundreds of games that depend on X. So when we look at Wayland, our perspective is, okay, is this going to break us or not? And if it is going to break us, that's kind of a non-starter. Mm-hmm. And if it's not going to break us, what does it give us? And right now, that equation is unknown. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We don't know. It doesn't appear to give us any direct benefits because we're really OpenGL focused. It's not going to do much there for us, and it just has some potential to break X compatibility across all the games and things we have. And I don't know how good their compatibility story is because it seems to be in flux a bit.
Okay. And my second quick question is, have you considered better integration with Wine? Like, if I have Wine installed in the system, would it be possible to have Steam recognize that and let me install Windows applications?
The problem with that is it's really not Steam's job to be running a third-party app in a way it's not really ever designed or intended to be run. We can't guarantee anything app is going to run under Wine. We can't test it. We can't support it. If you bought a Windows game and it didn't run under Wine, whose fault is that? Is it Steam's? Is it the game developer? It's not really a good position for us to be in. So.
So you, do I have to? So you mentioned a lot of the benefits of having a hackable platform, but I know that not all of it is. So I'm wondering if you could be more clear about which parts of it are still proprietary and what the motivation is for keeping them that way, given that the benefits that you talked about having a free
the
platform
only thing that is not open source in SteamOS is the Steam client itself, and of course all the games.
So why not the client? And do you have any plans to encourage more free software games in Steam?
I don't think we've talked a little about open sourcing the client, but probably not going to happen. I don't see it happening. It's something we're actively developing. It's pretty proprietary. It's crucial to our business. The cost-benefit ratio there doesn't seem to be right, in my opinion, to open source it at this point.
There's a question on IRC. When is in-home streaming coming from Linux to Linux again?
Well, in-home streaming is already there on Linux. You can stream
It used to work and it stopped.
Yeah, there's
streaming from Linux?
Yeah, there's been some refactoring of the code used to Steam from Mac and Linux, but it's being actively worked on at the moment.
I didn't know it.
Sorry, this question is maybe a little bit trollish, but and I apologize in advance. I know you're focusing on the living room experience with Steam, but does the Linux Steam client is going to proliferate through any Linux desktop? Do you think that it would be an extremely attractive platform for proprietary software that's not necessarily games? You do sell some non-games on the Windows part, but do you see that as an attractive platform where they would bypass the entire packaging setup we have
for people to sell things that are not
yes,
games
because
Steam.
They have one thing that nobody else has, it's metrics. And it's very hard for a proprietary vendor to gauge the market, Linux market. So
we do have some things that are not games that are sold through Steam. I'm probably not the right person to talk to. If you have such a thing, I could probably connect you to the right people to talk to. But we're not saying we only sell games. We do sell. Right now, I think it's mainly tools, right, for building games that get sold through Steam. That's pretty popular. There's probably a few other things. I can't tell off the top of my head what they all are, but there's even a non-game section or something on Steam. Right. So, but it is the focus is mainly games.
So you guys aren't going to open source the Steam client, which makes sense in some respect, but you guys are the gatekeepers to thousands of games. Do you ever foresee a future where open source games can sort of be like presented in a way that, and actually sort of promote the fact that they are open source or free, and like you can actually dig into the game's open source right out of the Steam client, like maybe like a right-click menu option, view source, if the game supports it.
On the game,
sure, yeah.
I guess we could do that. I haven't seen a huge demand for it.
I mean, there's the whole modding community. It just happens sort of behind Valve's back, essentially. It doesn't really, like, if I know you guys have a workshop.
There's a lot of stuff we do to enable mods specifically. Sure. It's a big part of the open platform, we want to deliver is so people can mod. All kinds of, mod. There's all sorts of different ways you can mod stuff. And you look at a game like Skyrim, and the mods are like almost way better than the original game was. Right. I like Skyrim.
Well, you told us how you use. You told us how you use Debian. You told us how you distract Debian engineers by giving away free licenses. But I couldn't find any edges in your workflow diagrams leading back from SteamOS to Debian. So how contribute you back to Debian?
Yeah, we pushed a few bug fixes we found in apt and unattended upgrades up. So far, that's been mainly bug fix stuff that has gone upwards. And I know we did the app stuff. Was it? Yeah. Onto the conference. That's right.
So if you take all the, for example, the Mesa work we're funding, that goes directly back upstream into Mesa, which makes its way back into Debian. There's a lot of other projects where we've been contributing to. I mean, the kernel patches that we were mentioning before, that also will trickle back into Debian at some point, whenever it makes it upstream and whenever Debian picks up that kernel release. We're big proponents of keeping it that way, not only because it benefits everyone, but because it makes our lives easier when we want to switch to Jesse or whatever is the next stable Debian release. So it's definitely on our radar to do that kind of stuff.
And we are looking for other ways we can help the community. If you have suggestions, please let me know.
So, for example, id Software is famous for releasing stuff initially as proprietary, and then some years later, re-releasing stuff as open source. How easy would it be for someone who wrote a game for Steambox to later open source it?
I mean, I'm not sure what you're asking. It's open sourcing a game is just like open sourcing anything else. You got to make sure you have all the rights and the copyrights and.
Oh well, I mean.
Additional restrictions on that?
I mean, is there
any
if you're distributing through the Steam system, is there like extra stuff that you have to do that's difficult to rip out in any way?
I don't think so.
The only thing is the SteamWorks SDK, but I mean, as long as you don't distribute the actual library that we have, everything else is fine.
Right, there's a library that integrates with Steam for doing friends and achievements and things like that you would probably have to rip out, but it wouldn't make sense outside of Steam anyway. So
there's not a lot of deep integration between SteamOS games and SteamOS, because all these games work in Steam for Linux, and most of the time standalone too. So that isn't a big issue. You had a question? Nope.
Sorry, this is. Yeah, so coming back to the question of how Valve gives back, in case people aren't aware, I will let you know that in addition to the various things they've talked about, and it's always, of course, good to challenge companies about how they do contribute back to Debian, Valve is sponsoring DebConf this year. They are one of our gold sponsors, so thank you very much for that, John.
And we got great placement on the T-shirt too. I'm pretty happy about that. That was good.
So one question I have for you is regarding your diagram of packages flowing from Debian to Steam, where my understanding is that currently your Alchemist beta and your Alchemist channels are both based on, currently on Wheezy, and you talked about how you would have a later release that would be based on Jessie. Have you considered pulling in from SID and tracking unstable during the development phases? And why did you choose not to go that way?
We may have a package or two that we've pulled from SID. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm looking at Pierre Lou, but I should be looking at myself. There are some. There's nothing philosophically we have against pulling from newer stuff. It's just it's easier for us if the stuff's not changing out from under us as much. It's purely a matter of making our lives easier to build on something more stable than less.
So was your question whether we should start experimenting with SID to lay the foundation for our next release?
Right, so I guess the question is, should the beta channel, so the way your beta channel works, I guess, is it's solely based on pulling new versions in from the stable release that you're tracking, and should there be a channel, yes, I guess I would say, should there be some sort of experimental channel that users can start looking forward to that would be tracking SID or even
It's purely would be just a bunch of work for us to track. I mean, we basically at that point have 3 different releases we had to manage rather than just one, and one is keeping us plenty busy. So, if we had an infinite number of resources, maybe we could have Alchemist, something else that tracked Wheezy, Jessie, and SID, but we just don't have the manpower for that, and it's not clear what the benefit would be. So we'll bite that bullet when we have to.
So in terms of the libraries that are currently included in the runtime, what kinds of factors go into making that decision? For instance, if I had an application that I wanted to distribute through Steam, but it relied on another 30 libraries from different platform components, would that be a case where you would just willingly add those to the runtime, or would that be a case where I would have to attempt to refactor my application?
We're not averse to adding stuff to the runtime where it makes sense. Some things would be, rather than adding refactoring application, might be bundling that. We see that, for instance, with Mono or Java-based applications. They'll just bundle that with their application, so it's part of their depot, their application, and they ship that dependency along with themselves. But if there's something that a lot of games have in common that makes sense for us to add to the runtime, we recently added support for a Clang and for the newer version of GCC to take advantage of the C++ 11 stuff. That was a pretty high demand from some of our developers, wanted that newer compiler, so we've updated the runtime with that. All right, I'm getting the 1 minute sign, so one more question.
Just a comment. I'm looking at the SteamOS patches here against Debian. A lot of them don't have any rationale in the changelog. For example, IP tables, you're disabling the test suite. I don't know why, but just to comment, more rationale in the changelogs would be awesome for Debian people looking at the patches.
I think we disabled it because it wasn't working in our system, our environment. I mean, a lot of we build these things in the CH root, and a lot of the tests kind of have some weird side effects on our build system. I know PHP is notorious for that, so whenever we build PHP, we have to reboot machines and stuff. It's crazy. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time. If you have any other questions, I'll be around the rest of the day. So thanks for all your help.